Hey guys, welcome! Today we're talking about a man so evil, so abusive, so mean that the closest people to him wanted him dead. Thurman Martin was shot in his sleep by his grandson and his grandson's stepfather. His murder was then covered up by his granddaughter and his daughter. He would be buried in his own backyard under a strip of freshly planted tomatoes. This is the tomato patch murder. You know those cases where the victim killer ratio's off? It almost puts you in a place of where you feel bad for the murderer more than you do the victim. That was this case for me. I struggled so much to garner sympathy for this man based off the simple fact that he traumatized and brutalized his family day in and day out, and he was a monster. So with that being said, I do pay my respects to him. No one deserves to be murdered, obviously, but some would say that Thurman had it coming. 64-year-old Thurman Martin was born March 6, 1933. There's not much about his upbringing and the way he was raised. I couldn't find anything on his family members before him. So I normally like to add that in there just to maybe have some clues or reasoning as to why he was the way that he was. Nevertheless, Thurman was a retired truck driver who settled in his hometown of Louidicy, Georgia. If I'm saying that wrong, please correct me in the comments. The town itself is your average town. There's not much crime or much of anything. It's pretty quiet and, peaceful. Although it is considered a speed trap town. Georgia actually passed so many laws because of Louidicy and the way that people speed there. Record or background, you could say. That's what it's known for, is speeding. But other than that, Louidicy is your average town. The same could not be said for Thurman Martin. He was described actually in the complete opposite manner. Thurman was described as very abusive to his family, not just by his family, but by friends, locals, neighbors, just the people that were surrounding them in their everyday lives. Really did describe Thurman as just not a very pleasant person to be around. Thurman meets a woman named Lula Kate, and they do get married and end up having 2 children of their own. I just want to preface by saying it's always the sweetest, down-to-earth, kind, shy, timid people that end up being with the most abusive, vulgar, obnoxious people. I don't know what attracts them to each other, but I see that so often. That was Lula and Thurman. Thurman treated this poor woman like shit. But the 2 children they would end up having together would be Edward Dean Martin, who was born in 1954, and Diana Crowder, who was born in 1958. Diane and Edward grew up in a very toxic, abusive household. It's said that Lula, the children's mother, Thurman's wife, she tried her best to keep Thurman angry at her and abusive towards her because she didn't want her children to experience the same abuse she did, but that did not last very long. Thurman would start abusing Diana by the age of 2. Edward didn't seem to get as much of the abuse. He didn't get to see his dad's evil side as much as Diana did. Diana had one of the worst childhoods that I've personally ever heard of. One of the most disturbing things I found out researching this case was Thurman would use the Bible to validate the sexual abuse he was doing to his daughter. He would validate it and say it's okay because that's what Noah did when God flooded the earth. The ones who remained slept with their children. So that makes it okay. He would use the Bible to validate what he was doing to his daughter. And this went on Diana's entire childhood. She didn't have one. She was to sexually please her father and clean around the house, and if she did any of those things wrong, she would be beaten in front of everyone or with no one. He didn't care. He would beat her for anything. This would just be an ongoing thing until she would meet John Stanton, who was 18 years her senior, and they would actually get married. John said that he really wanted to marry Diana because he wanted to protect her, and he knew what she had been through, just like all the other locals in the town. And he wanted to protect her and help her, and he felt like she wouldn't be able to make it on her own. So due to all of the abuse from Thurman, Diana had a lot of psychological issues, one of those being multiple personality disorder, and she just had a really hard time living her day-to-day life. But Diana also had 2 children before she married John. So John was stepfather to Billy Crowder, Diana's son, and Katie Crowder, Diana's daughter. The 4 of them, Diana, John, Billy, and Katie, lived in a trailer only feet away from Thurman's house. They basically lived in their backyard. So Thurman and Lula Kate, their grandmother, did have a big role in them growing up. Like, they were always around them, and they would spend a lot of time with them, and Thurman actually started forcing Katie and Billy to work at his shop, clean up the shop, clean up after him, free labor from Billy. It was said by a lot of people that Thurman treated those children like his own personal slaves. 15 witnesses testified that Thurman beat Billy and Katie all of the time.
The conversations kept coming back to the patriarch's treatment of his own family.
He was abusive from my point of view because, like I said, I've seen him over here at the shop with Billy. He's beat him in the face.
Billy and Katie would run away from their grandfather, and he would drive the roads, hunting them down wherever he found them. He would bang on the door, demand his grandchildren back, and then beat them in front of whoever sheltered them. Because these friends' houses that Billy and Katie were going to, the parents would hide them out and let them stay there because they knew how bad Thurman was.
But, just always be real scared, and they'd be crying and so afraid, and a lot of times would come to our house and he would come hunting them.
And it's just so confusing because if all these people are so aware of what's going on, why was nothing done? Like, why didn't anyone step in, call authorities, call CPS, say something to Billy? I think people were truly just scared of Billy. He talked big game. He was always threatening people's lives, especially his family. He had guns, all kinds of weapons that he would use to intimidate people. Katie and Billy were described as timid, very shy. It always seemed like they were walking on eggshells, kind of like they were afraid of making a mistake around people. There was actually a time that Billy made Thurman really upset, and Thurman took a tire iron and whacked him across the head with it. Billy said that happened on a number of occasions. There was another time where Billy did something wrong at the shop, and Thurman stabbed him in the shoulder with a screwdriver. A friend of Billy said that Thurman was the most evil man he had ever seen. The same friend testified that Thurman hit Billy with a welding iron in front of him.
I've seen him hit him with welding rods.
Approximately how hard would he strike Billy? Like that? Harder than that?
Yeah, so he just come around, and he'd strike him.
In general terms, what kind of person did you think Thurman Martin was?
Probably the cruelest man I ever met.
And as much as Billy was suffering abuse, Katie was also no exception to this. She was made to do all of the cleaning, all of the time. She had to stay busy or she would be a target for him. And there was one time where she was cleaning up the shop and she left a literal feather behind. And Thurman beat her in front of everyone at the shop and made her pick the feather up with her mouth. Billy and Katie also loved their grandmother, Lula. Like I said, Lula was never the problem. She tried her best to keep Thurman from... She's only a small-for-old woman, but she tried her best to keep the abuse from going on to the grandchildren. Lula was beaten so bad by Thurman in her last years of life. There was one occasion where he took her inhaler, her life-depending medication, took her inhaler, threw it across the room, and said, "If you go get that, I'm gonna kill you." There was multiple times Billy said that Thurman would smack his wife Lula in the back of the head so hard he would knock her false teeth out. Lula had multiple broken ribs. He treated her like a rag doll. He did this until the day she died. She died 3 months before he did, and he made her life a living hell the entire time. Pause the story. I'm still going to remind you that Thurman is the victim of today's case. This is just a small percentage of the things that Thurman has done to his family that caused them to feel like they had to stop him. I'm not saying they should be free. After Lula died, Thurman would try to start Katie as well. Mind you, Thurman died 3 months after his wife. So in a span of 3 months, he was already trying to his granddaughter. This man is sick. I'm sorry. Thurman always threatened everyone around him, especially his family, whether it be with guns, knives, their life-saving medication. Thurman loved to have power and fear over people. I think that is what his motives were with everything he did. He created a patriarchy of a family, and he was the center of it. And one day, everyone around Thurman had had enough of his bullshit. 5 people conspired together to stop Thurman Martin. Jason Jordan, Billy Crowder, Katie Crowder, John Stanton, and Diane Crowder. These were all family members of Thurman Martin with the exception of Jason. Jason was a longtime friend of Billy's, and he was recruited by Billy to help with the murder. Jason decided to help because he'd seen firsthand what Thurman was putting Billy and Billy's family through. Although Jason wasn't abused by Thurman himself and he didn't know Thurman very well, he had definitely seen a lot of abuse from Thurman to his grandchildren. And because of that, he decided to help. The plan was John, Billy, and Jason would each shoot Thurman once. So that way they would all be implicated in the murder in hopes that nobody would tell, nobody would fess up, and nobody would turn on each other. With the plan in motion, May 18th, 1997, around 12 p.m., John and Billy go to pick up Jason from his home. The 3 arrive to Thurman's house, and Billy enters the house first with John and Jason behind him. As the 3 enter the house, John and Billy, they go past the kitchen into the room where Thurman is sleeping. Jason decides to stay in the kitchen. Jason describes hearing multiple gunshots and then a pause. And then 2 more shots are fired. Billy goes into the kitchen and hands the gun to Jason, basically telling him, "It's your turn, you gotta go in there and you gotta shoot him. Like, this is what we planned, this was the plan." Jason refuses to shoot Thurman. After murdering his grandfather, Billy took $600 out of Thurman's wallet that he allegedly had stolen from Billy. I want you to remember that because it is important. And at this point, I'm sure you're probably wondering, where's the other 2? Where's Diana and Katie? I thought there were 5 people implicated in the murder. Diane and Katie's job was cleanup and disposal. They were in charge of cleaning up the mess, cleaning up the blood, getting the house back in order, and disposing of the body. So that's what they did. Diane and Katie cleaned the blood up, they got the house back in order, wrapped Thurman up, and planted him right in the garden. The next day, Diane did call police and report her dad missing, but there was no sense of urgency because according to his family members, Thurman went to bed that night as usual, and when they woke up, he was gone. His truck was still in the driveway, but his wallet was gone. So they had assumed that Martin had just left. Mind you, there was no evidence of struggle in the home. Thurman was an adult. If he wanted to leave, he could. So that is what the police had in mind. But investigators quickly noticed that something was off. As they are doing interviews and just getting as much information as they can, a lot of the allegations, the abuse, and the eyewitnesses came forward and said that Thurman wasn't a nice guy, and if anyone was probably going to kill Thurman, it was his family. Not only that, the family wasn't consistent with their statements and their timelines were off. So with all of that combined, investigators were like, yeah, something's definitely fishy, something's definitely up. It was also stated that the neighbors had never seen Thurman leave the property. No one had seen Thurman physically leave the house. Police did interview Martin's son, Edward. Edward had said that, end quote, his daddy had beaten John several times, and if anybody killed Martin, it was probably John. But investigators would receive a break in the case when Tony Shackelford came forward, which was Jason Jordan's girlfriend at the time, stating that she thinks that Jason had something to do with the murder. Jason was out of town telling friends that he knew someone who killed their abusive granddad and he helped. And he was just kind of blabbering his mouth to all of his friends and his girlfriend, and it bit him in the ass because that is ultimately what tipped off police to investigate the entire family. All 5 of them were quickly found out and they were arrested, all with murder charges, but 2 of these murder charges wouldn't stick because Katie and Diane, remember, all they did was help after the fact. So their murder charges were dropped. Katie and Diane were charged with being an accessory after the fact. Katie was sentenced to 6 months in prison and 5 years probation. Diane was found guilty but mentally ill and ordered to undergo a year of psychiatric treatment. Jason Jordan would have his trial, and the jury was not happy with him for wanting to just join along for the ride. They found that disgusting, and it took them no time to come back with a guilty verdict. The prosecution and the jury found it very cold-blooded that Jason was just along for the ride, and they did not like that he had never been abused by Thurman, but he helped take part in his murder. And the jury took almost no time to come back with a guilty verdict, and Jason was sentenced to life in prison for this. Although he did not pull the trigger, he was still convicted of murder. It just left a bad taste in people's mouth. His mother did an interview after the guilty verdict came in, and she was very upset. She felt like the jury found Jason guilty the minute he walked in the courtroom. She thought that was way too fast to come back with a guilty verdict.
It was like he was convicted before he even got inside. And to me, it's not fair. They should have, the jury should have took longer than that to give a decision like that. You just can't put somebody's life away like that, just like that. And it wasn't right to me.
Now, with Johnston and Billy Crowder's trial went a lot different. It was a lot longer. The defense showed a lot of Thurman's abuse. Even had Katie go on the stand and talk about how her grandfather was a horrible man and tried to rape her. And at that moment is when you really see Billy show the most emotion he did the entire trial. You could tell that it really mentally affected him, what they had been through. And John would actually pass out in the middle of one of his court hearings because he was battling cancer during the time of the trial. He was very sick. The judge actually thought he was faking, but the ambulance was called and he was taken to the hospital. I just thought that was crazy. Imagine dying of cancer and defending yourself for murder. Like, what? John Stanton was found guilty and sentenced to life for the murder of Thurman Martin. When the jury came to Billy, he did use the battered persons defense, and he was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, which he was given 5 years in prison for. So for me, that felt justified. Like, you still should go to prison because you did kill someone, but under the circumstances, I think you should still have another chance at life. But that was not the end for Billy. No, no, no. Remember the $600 that I told you to remember and how important it was? When Billy took that $600 from his grandfather, also shooting him with a gun, that created an armed robbery charge. Armed robbery charges in Georgia carry a life sentence regardless. So Billy was found guilty of armed robbery and he still got life in prison. I can only imagine being Billy and thinking, oh my gosh, 5 years, okay, I can do that. And then they come back with a verdict of the armed robbery and now you have to do life in prison over $600. Crazy, crazy, crazy. As far as where they are now, John Stanton later died in prison. As far as Billy, he did get married while in prison. And in April of 2012, he was eligible for parole. His wife, Tanya Crowder, said that he did make parole and he would be getting out. However, the State Board of Pardon and Parole Public Affairs Director Steve Hayes said he could not confirm whether Billy was granted parole or not. This case was insane, and honestly, it took me so long to just wrap my head around it. What are your thoughts? Do you think that all of them got a fair sentence? Do you think that they deserved what they got? Do you think that Thurman deserved what he got? Comment down below. Let me know what you think. Like, share, comment, and subscribe, please. It could really help out my channel. That's it for today's case, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.